So excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And as I go ahead and share my screen, and I do have permission to do that, I want to just welcome everyone to be here so we can talk about the FAFSA. As you probably are aware, there are a lot of changes to the FAFSA this year. It is the largest changes we've had in nearly 40 years now. And so I know that many of you have questions, so that's why I'm here. I'm here to break down the FAFSA for you, all the new changes, give you opportunity to ask questions, and see how we can meet in the middle about things that you need, things that you feel like you are going to need in the future, or if there are some other things that we can be aware of before the FAFSA opens, okay? So let's go ahead and get right in. I do have the chat open as well, so I'll keep my eyes open as we go through this, and we'll always leave time for questions at the end. So as I said earlier, we're going to talk about all the changes that that are surely coming right quick in a hurry in a couple of months. As you are aware, the date has changed. We have announced that the launching of the new form will be in December. So instead of October 1st opening, it will open on December. So your follow-up question probably is going to be, what day in December, Tanika? We know it's December. We have not announced that yet. And neither do I even know what the date is. So we're still pending that, but we should be announcing that in the fall. When I say fall, we're talking about late October, early November times. We're trying to give it enough leeway and opportunity for people to be prepared. So please be aware that it is December opening. We will also talk about a lot of the changes that are coming. As you see on the screen, we will go through all of these, and there will be some additional changes as well. Throughout this presentation, there will be a couple of slides that will show some screenshots of the new form. So you will understand the new FAFSA experience, as we are calling it, and also understanding a little bit more about what the student and the parent or contributors will see later on. So let's just go right into it. So as I just alluded to, these are the biggest changes we've seen in 40 years, okay? So that means it's an overhaul of the entire application and the experience, okay? So that's very important that you will realize that it's not just, oh, we're changing a couple questions here and the format looks exactly the same. No, it's a completely change of the actual form itself and the experience. So what are the student and the parent going to be experiencing when they're completing the form looks completely different than it has in the last 40 years. We are calling this entire thing, it's a theme, called Better FAFSA, Better Future. Okay, now this isn't a term for us to just be cute, even though it is a little cute, like kind of saying, but it is something that we've had to meet with Congress. So all of the changes that we've implemented into the form have been voted for and been approved by Congress over the last 2 to 3 years. So this is just coming now, so it might seem like it's very sudden, but for us, it's been an ongoing, slowly approaching moment, and this moment is here on this particular FAFSA. So on the Better FAFSA, Better Future form, as I just said, it will be opening and launching on December. So December 2023, which means this is when the application will go live. Again, for those who just joined, we have not issued out the official date yet in December, and we are hoping to be able to announce that at the end of October, early November, to give everybody enough time to be able to be prepared for this application, to start the application. Now, some people might ask, is that going to affect deadlines? The answer is yes, it is going to affect deadlines, and it already has. All of the schools throughout the country have already been aware that the FAFSA date has been pushed back to December. I do want to clarify here and make very clear that it is just for December for this year alone. Okay, so only for the 2024 launch, it will be issued out in December, but 2025, 2026, 2027, and so far, will go back to October 1st launching. So this is the only year that this will be a December launch, okay? Which means there's gonna be some state deadline changes as well. some states are issuing out or being able to have students supported through financials, through scholarships or grants. And some of those deadlines were earlier in the semester and they have been pushed back. So I would make sure that you connect with your state, or you can use this website here, this on the screen, which we have been intentionally reaching out to states to see if their deadlines have changed. So if they have, we would have it on our site here on this link on FAFSA deadlines. Now, if this is a question that's going to come, yes, you will get access to this PDF following this presentation as well. So you'll be able to click on any of these links during this presentation. So let's jump right into some of the key changes. Now, when I say there are a lot of key changes, there are a lot of key changes to the form, but the experience is a shortened list. And so we're going to go about the experience. What is a student and a parent going to experience when they're filling out this FAFSA form? And what are the main changes that are the major ones that you should be aware of or be able to communicate with students and families moving forward? The first of these is that everyone is required to have an FSA ID. Okay. Now, an FSA ID is a username and password in order to get into studentaid.gov and to start and complete the FAFSA ID, the FAFSA form, excuse me. So the FSA ID is something that not only students have to have, but also parents have to have. Now, you could say, well, that's not a change. Correct. It is not a change. That in order to complete the FAFSA form, you had to have an FSA ID. Before, you could start a FAFSA form and not have an FSA ID, but now is required to even start the application. Now, there are some changes this year to that. Prior, if a student had a parent who did not have a Social Security number and was not able to create an FSA ID, they had to print out that application. The student had to complete their part of the form, had to print out that form, and then have their parent physically sign that form and mail it in. Everything is moving to electronic this year. And so therefore, the parent will now have the opportunity to create an FSA ID, even if they don't have a Social Security number. Now, in preparation for all of you who are supporting students and families currently, what could you be doing is that you could be helping students and families start and create an FSA ID now. So they can go ahead and do that. They can create an FSA ID now, save their password in preparation for the launch in December. I highly recommend doing that only because sometimes that FSA ID does have to get verified for the Social Security number, and that could take up to 3 days. What we don't want to do is have everyone inundating the website in December, trying to get FSA ID, trying to get into their FAFSA form, and having a little bit of crashes going on. And so we're hoping that you can assist in helping students and families create that. The only change to that, or the caveat to that, is that parents who do not have a Social Security number and also, again, need to create an FSA ID will not be able to do so until December. So that ability to create an FSA ID without a Social Security number will not be eligible or available until December, which is the same day or month of the launch of the FAFSA form. So please be aware of that. So everyone else who does have a Social Security number or has an alien ID number, any of those can create an FSA ID now, but, and sorry, they're mowing and they're, disturbing here. But if they are able to, if they don't have either one of those, Social Security number or an alien ID number, they will have to wait till December. Let's move forward here.
I have a question, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, so if a parent does not have a Social Security number, they can still get an FSA ID, is what you're saying?
That is correct. That is correct.
But they cannot do what in December?
They cannot start or create an FSA ID until December. So they
so they can create it, but they just can't do it until December. Okay,
Correct. That is correct.
thank
Okay.
you.
And they will need to have one as well. Okay, so excellent. Now that still does not change any of the rules for a student. A student who does not have a social security number or an alien ID, they're still not eligible to complete the FAFSA. And so they won't be able to proceed onward to the FAFSA form without that. It's only the parent or the contributors, and we'll get into that in a second, who will be able to create an FSA ID without a social security number.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and they won't be able to do that to December. Of course, great clarifying question. So on the screen here, I just want to give you an overview or just a snapshot of what the new application experience looks like. Okay, so generally on the first page of the FAFSA form, it was just, hey, you want to log in. As you can see, we revamped it. We made it all student friendly here. They're going to open up to this main page, which is right here on the left hand, which will talk a little bit about the FAFSA. It will tell them a little bit about who is expected to complete it, how long it might take, and what are some things that they will need in order to complete that FAFSA form. That is the very first page that they will see when they go to FAFSA.gov. If they log into studentaid.gov first and then click on FAFSA, this is the very first image that they will see. After they log into their studentaid.gov account using the FSA ID, they will be able to say, who are you starting this? Who's starting this? Is it a student or a parent? So in this case, we have selected here a student. Of course, a parent can also start it as well. So this is kind of what the page will look like, just to give you an overview. So another thing that's changed with the FAFSA experience is that we have an onboarding process. Okay, the onboarding process pretty much means that they will be able to have materials, a little bit more materials about the FAFSA. So let's say you're working with a student and maybe they quite weren't paying attention to you when you were going over this with them, and they're saying they're having questions or may just need a refresher about what's the big deal about this FAFSA form. We do have 4 sections. They will have a video that they can watch, which is what is the FAFSA form. They'll be able to understand a little bit more about what is a contributor and why they'll be asked to be invited to their FAFSA form. They'll also be able to see what to expect in completing this form. And then also, after they submitted their FAFSA form, what should they be doing? So these are the 4 things that are part of their onboarding process before they start the FAFSA form. Now, the second and most major change to the FAFSA is contributors. Now, contributors is considered anyone, and I mean anyone, who is asked to complete information on the FAFSA form. So this is anyone that is asked to complete information on the FAFSA form. No, that could be a parent, and that can also be a student as well. So a student is also identified as a contributor. So the main term contributor means anyone who's going to be contributing or being able asked to fill out any portion of the FAFSA form itself. So let's go into a little bit more about that. Who is a contributor? As we just said, a student, a parent. It could be a student's spouse if they're married. It can also, when we say parent, we're talking about biological and adoptive parents only. So if it is someone that they call parent, but they're not technically adopted by them, or they're not their biological parent, they will not be expected to fill out the FAFSA form. This is the same if it's a grandparent. This is the same if it's an aunt or an uncle. All of those will not be considered a contributor and therefore are not expected to complete form. It can also be a parent's spouse. So let's say that the student has a biological parent and they have been remarried or they are married to someone else, then that person will also be asked to complete the section of the FAFSA form. So it's really important that we understand that if a student does not have any of these, let's say they don't have a biological or adoptive parent and they don't have a spouse, or their parent doesn't have a spouse themselves, then that very much well can mean that they are an independent student. So that includes if they have foster parents, if they again have grad parents, a grandparents, a brother or sister, uncle, aunt, someone that they're living with, a mentor. All of those are not considered contributors and does not make that student or make them complete the FAFSA form, and they are very much considered an independent student. So we're only asking contributors to dependent students, if you haven't gotten that. So if they are a dependent student, then they will be asked to invite a contributor to the FAFSA form. Again, the student themselves is considered a contributor, so they will need to complete their FAFSA form themselves. Once that FAFSA form, once the student is in their FAFSA and they're completing it, there will be a section, there'll be some questions that they have to answer to determine if they are a dependent student. If they are deemed to be a dependent student, then they will be asked to invite contributors. So if students not quite sure, I don't know if I'm a dependent student, I'm not quite sure who I need to invite or not, as they're going through the FAFSA form and completing the questions, the form will tell them whether they're a dependent student and also gear them or lead them to inviting contributors. If they are not determined to be a dependent student, they will automatically skip the section to be invited to invite contributors, and therefore they know they are independent students. Okay, is that clear to everyone? So only dependent students are going to be asked by contributors. Now, when we say invite contributors, that means that they have to put into the FAFSA form specific information to invite that contributor, which is a parent or a student spouse or a parent spouse. They will need that contributor's full name, their date of birth, social security number, and email address. Okay, so these are the information that they will need. Again, the FAFSA form will tell them and indicate to them who they will be need to ask to be considered to invite as a contributor. So if a student is filling it out and they're saying, okay, they're telling me I have to invite my biological mom. Okay, then that means they need to have their biological mom's name, their date of birth, their social security number, and their email address. Now you're probably saying, well, what happens if the parent does not have a social security number? You just told me that they can create an FSA ID, correct? You just told me they can create an FSA ID, but now you're saying they have to be invited as a contributor with a social security number. Well, there's going to be a checkbox there that says my parent does not have a social security number. When they check on that box, then it will ask for other information like an address or an email address, anything like that, that will at least be able to invite that parent. Now, the question might say, why are we asking for the email address? Or is it required to have an email address? The answer is yes, because that is where that invitation is going to be sent for them to even get access into the FAFSA form. Okay, so if they don't have an email address, we're asking you to support the parents and the student to be able to create an email address for those parents so they will have access to that link. Okay, so as soon as that student submits for that contributor using that email address, they will receive a notification via email that they've been asked to be invited as a contributor to the FAFSA form. Okay, now all personal information, this is what the screen will look like. Okay, so that screen, they will see two options. In this case, a student started filling it out and they indicated that their parents are divorced or the parent remarried. And so therefore it says parent on one end here. And then on the other box on this first hand, it says parent spouse. So this means that they would have to submit the social security number of their parent and also the social security number of the parent's spouse. Again, you see this button here where it says my parent doesn't have a social security number. That's the checkbox I was referring to, in which they will be able to click that if they don't have a social security number. And there, when they click that, there will be other options that appear for them. So after they have submitted their contributions, after the student has already completed their section, now there are a couple sections to the student section that includes the demographics, so their contact information and demographics. It includes the colleges that they select as well, that they can submit that they want to send their FAFSA to. It also includes a student financials. So any student financials, they will be able to complete that section as well. And then after they complete all of those things, there will also be an opportunity for them to say, okay, here's an overview of the contributors that I have invited. And this is the home screen that they will see. It says that you're almost completed. So we don't want students to assume that they fill out their section, they're done, the FAFSA is completed. Their FAFSA will not be completed until the parents, their contributors, have completed their sections of the FAFSA form. So please be aware of that. And they will see the status. It will say that the invitation was sent. It will say that the invitation was open. It will say that the invitation has gone through. Now, from the parents' end, when they receive that email, there will be a code in that email and a direct link. And that code is what they will use to get into the FAFSA form. They should have already had an FSA ID created. If not, they can create the FSA ID there. And once they log in, it will say you have been invited to this student's FAFSA form, where they will click on and they will complete their sections. This is different. This experience is different. If you recall, in the past FAFSA forms, it seemed like the student and the parent were in the same form at the same time, and they could just do one form. The student's information is their section alone. It's only the only section they're responsible for. The contributor, parent, spouse, student spouse, has their own individual section, and they don't really talk to each other. So they talk to each other in terms of providing the information, but they don't see each other's information. Okay, so a student can't go into the parent section and fill out their section and vice versa. Now, a parent can start an application, however. So let's say a parent wants to get ahead of the ball game. They think their student is a procrastinator, whatever it might be. They can actually create their FSA ID, and when the FAFSA launches, they can actually go ahead into their FAFSA form and start that FAFSA application. And they can go as far as adding the schools for the student. They can put in the student's information. They can even put in the student's financials if they want, okay? And then they will be able to provide all of the parent section as well. This does not mean that the student no longer doesn't have to sign in because the parent did everything. No, it's still expected for the student to sign into their FSA, using their FSA ID, and be able to review, make edits and changes to their student section from whatever the parent submitted. Sometimes the parent doesn't know, so they left it blank. Sometimes the parent may have put schools and maybe the parent wants to the student to apply to, and the student's like, I'm not applying to that school. They can change everything because the student that's their application. Okay, so the student does have access to make changes to whatever the parent has started on the application, but they both have to provide consent and permission to complete the FAFSA form. Okay, I hope, and there might be some questions on that later, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that is how the contributors work for the parent. The parent can start, and the student can start as well. It can start at both at the same time as well. So if you're doing FAFSA nights and you're wondering, can I have both parent and student there at the same time doing this? The answer is yes, you absolutely can. Student is going to complete their section, parent is going to complete their section, and they will already be matched together. Okay, great. So just as a reflector, the student, which is the contributor, is going to go in, they're going to receive the email, or they're going to start their application. The student's already requested the contributor. The contributor will receive an email identifying them as a contributor. They will go into studentaid.gov. They will log in using their FSA ID. They will then review the information that was already on the FAFSA form and complete their section. After they complete their section, they can provide all required information on the student's form and then hit submit. The form will not be completed until all parties have submitted their sections. Okay, all right, let's move forward. Okay, so we have a couple scenarios, but we might be running a little out of time here. So I'm just going to zoom through these, and maybe we can come back to these if we have a little bit more time. Okay, so another change, financial aid direct data exchange. You might recall that we used to have a data retrieval tool, which allowed for students and families to connect to the IRS to bring information into the FAFSA form. Data retrieval tool has been removed. Now it is now the FTI, which is the Federal Tax Information Exchange. What this means is that everyone, hear me, all contributors must now consent to having their tax information transferred into the FAFSA form using the IRS, okay, or via the IRS. This is mandated, okay? It is not an option. In order to be eligible for federal student aid, they have to consent to this, okay? So I want to repeat, they must consent to the IRS submitting their information from their taxes into their FAFSA form. This includes if they didn't file taxes, if they're filing taxes outside of the US, and also if they don't have a social security number. They have to click that button to say that they are providing consent, okay? Now, please note, it's not all information that's transferring over from the IRS. It's just the information that is required for the FAFSA form alone. So we're not bringing any additional information besides what is required for the FAFSA form. This is important because, again, you won't be eligible for federal student aid unless this consent is provided. Now, there will be a button that says manually submit. Now, you're probably wondering, if it's mandated, why do we have a button about manually submitting? And why do we have an option to manually submit? Because there might be information that's not necessarily on a tax on the IRS that is required, or there might be some missing information that is going to be asked in the FAFSA form that we still would like for the student or the contributors to be able to provide. So that's why that button is there. But you must, and I repeat, provide consent in order to be eligible for federal student aid for this upcoming 2024-25 application. So things that you need to know, as I just covered, it is required. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You can manually enter information, but that does not take away from your need to consent. So even if you're like, well, I'm opting to manually put it in, you still must provide consent in order to be eligible for federal student aid. So please make sure that your students and families are aware of that. Now, to be on the safe side, we've already instituted into the form that as soon as they say, I decline to consent, there's going to be a pop-up that says, are you sure you want to decline? This is why you should actually accept. So there's going to be prompts there. So it's not going to just no, right? It's going to prompt them to say, these are the reasons why you should consent if you want to be eligible for federal student aid, okay? So here's another scenario that we'll get through if we can later on. But let's talk about one of the very last things are also changing, which is the student aid index. Now, this used to be the EFC, or the estimated expected family contribution, okay? EFC is long gone, so I need you to remove that from your vocabulary. EFC no longer exists. It's just the SAI, which is student aid index. Now, why is this important? It is important because the EFC really just gave Pell Grants based on certain eligibility. The student aid index actually is broken off into a spectrum. So you can have a negative all the way down to a negative 1,500 as a student aid index, all the way up to, $1 million, whatever it might be, right? Now, this doesn't equate to dollars, okay? So it's not going to be negative $1,500 or any of that. It's just a number, a range number. This also changes the need calculation slightly because prior and during the EFC, it was your cost of attendance minus your EFC minus any other financial assistance. Now it's just cost of attendance minus your student aid index minus any other financial assistance. So this student aid index actually allows for more people to be eligible for Pell Grant eligibility, and also expands eligibility in terms of financial aid for more family income all the way till. So it's really important that we are stressing to everyone that they're probably going to see maybe in prior years they weren't eligible for Pell Grant, and this year they will be, and there might be a shock to them. And it's just because it has expanded the eligibility requirements. Now, to that end, there are some things you should know that families should know regarding this SAI and what is considered an asset. So before, assets were pretty much any readily available funding that could assist a student to go to college or go to any post-secondary education. There were certain assets that were not considered in previous years. This year, they are being considered. One of those is child support. So child support will now be counted as an asset. Another thing will be family farm income. So if you are working with families who have a farm, that income will now also be counted as an asset. If they have a small business, that income will also be counted as an asset. From my understanding, a small business is really classified as anyone that has over 100 or more full-time employees. So we're not talking about, small businesses that don't have a lot of employees. We're talking about small businesses that do have 100 or more plus employees. So please be aware of that. Also, the number of family members in college is no longer considered in the need analysis. That's super important. So before, you still have this question on the FAFSA, how many are going to be in college besides the parents, but it won't be considered in the needs analysis for the years moving forward. Now, if that's a concern, then they should be able to talk with their school counselor, financial aid department, but it won't be considered in the needs analysis moving forward. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit more. So when I said there was a spectrum, there's a maximum and now there's a minimum Pell Grant, okay? So this is a big difference. So before it was just Pell Grant. You're eligible for Pell Grant, but now it's maximum or minimum Pell Grant. That's what you're eligible for. You're either eligible for the maximum or you're eligible for the minimum of Pell Grant. Now, this is all based on a few factors: your family size, the adjusted gross income, and the poverty guidelines, and tax filing. All of those are going to be considered from the FAFSA form to determine if a person is going to receive maximum Pell or if they're going to receive minimum Pell. Now, what is minimum Pell? Well, that's going to be dependent on the number of the Pell Grant, which we still haven't determined yet, but the award amount, and also be able to say, okay, now maybe I wasn't eligible for the maximum Pell Grant, which is the full award amount for the Pell, but I could be eligible for a minimum Pell Grant. So this is why the eligibility has expanded. Now, the reason why I say is maximum is minimum Pell Grant, but that doesn't mean that it's the same in the middle, right? So let's say you're not eligible for maximum Pell, but you're also not really eligible for the minimum Pell either. There are some eligibility in terms of financial aid in the middle, which is what we call a student aid index. Okay, so this is why it's completely different than the EFC, and it's going to allow more families to be eligible for financial aid. So the very last thing I want to cover is unusual and special circumstances. Now, this is very, very important because we do have a number of students who are falling into unusual and special circumstances. Now, this is a different term because we've heard special circumstances before, But unusual circumstances is a new term. So you want to be aware that there are differences. And so let's go through what those differences are. The first thing I want to bring up is independent student. What are we calling an independent student this time? So independent students, everything's the same as before. If you're of a certain age, if you're married but not separated, if you are a graduate student, if you're a veteran, if you're a member of the armed forces, if you're an orphan or in foster care, if you're a ward of the courts, if you're a legal dependent, if you're an emancipated minor, but also someone who is unaccompanied or at risk of being homeless. Those are considered independent students. Okay, so it's very important that we understand what's considered an independent student. Of course, you can help the student understand that prior to starting the FAFSA form, but please remember, we're going to be asking questions on the FAFSA form that will determine that as soon as they start their application to determine if they're dependent or independent. To be able, students with unusual circumstances will automatically be granted provisional independent status. Now, this means that if they certain criteria, certain specifics, then they will be granted provisional independent status, which means that this status is given over to the institution, the colleges of that they're sending this FAFSA to, and the school that determines if they are indeed considered an independent student. That is a final decision that's made from the school administrator and no one else. So they can't appeal it. They can't, go to someone else and say, well, this school, I was considered an independent student and this school is saying I'm not. It doesn't matter. That school has full determination and ability to determine if a student is indeed independent. But they are, after the filling out the FAFSA, considered a provisional independent student until the school says otherwise. A school can also decline that they're independent altogether and say that they are actually a dependent student as well. So it's really important that this is approval that must be granted from the school. So there are certain documentation that a school will use to make that decision. Please note, this is also another change. This year, starting this 2024-25 year, all schools are required to use professional judgment, which means that if their school or the FAFSA has determined someone to be provisionally granted independent status, they have to literally look at their account and determine if they are an independent student. But also, if a student says, I want to be considered for additional funding, and they're asking the school for that, a school has to consider there's that student view before giving them a decision. So that is something that is required. How a school deems to do that, every school has their own process. Every school also must make that process public. So a school or a student can ask a school in advance. So if as you're sending students to college fairs and things of that nature, you can ask them, what is their professional judgment criteria? What is the professional judgment process? Because it is public information that a school must provide to students about how they're going to be reviewing professional judgment. Okay, so that's something to just note for your students. Please note that this could be done from documentation, phone calls, statements from various officials, court documents, interviews, or it can also be just from the counselor themselves making an executive decision after a conversation with the student. Now let's break down what I mean by unusual circumstance. So unusual circumstance is anything that prohibits a student from making contact with a parent. Okay, so if a student is in harm or at risk of being in harm by making contact with a parent in order for the FAFSA to be completed, they are an unusual circumstance. So that includes human trafficking. That includes being granted refugee or asylum status. That includes parental abandonment or estrangement. That also includes student or parental incarceration. So if you have a student who's like, they're nervous about starting the FAFSA because they're like, I don't want to make contact with my parent because it could cause great harm to me. for any of these reasons, or even those reasons that might not be on the screen, they would be considered an unusual circumstance. On the fact asked if they want to be considered for unusual circumstance, they can check that box and they will be granted automatically provisional independent status. And again, they will need to provide documentation to the schools. The schools will be able to review that. They must review it. And then they'll be able to determine if that student is indeed an independent student. Okay, so that's how that process goes. That is different from special circumstance. Special circumstance is strictly financial. Okay, so special circumstance is special case basis based on income, loss of employment, reduction in income, tuition expenses at an elementary or secondary school, or maybe there's some medical expenses or dental expenses that they have to cover that was not covered by insurance. All of those things can impact the ability to pay for school. And so these are considered special circumstances. These are also cases that a student can take to the institution, the schools that they're applying to, and say, I have a special circumstance. They can provide documentation or proof of any of these, and a school must consider if they have a special circumstance or not. And if they do, they can change the amount eligibility of financial aid for that student. Okay, so this is why it's super important as you're working with students to see what can I share with students who might be fearful of filling out the FAFSA, or families who are fearful about filling out the FAFSA because they might not have as much income as they've had before, or there have been changes to their income, or they have unusual circumstance because they're fearful of making contact with a parent in order to complete the FAFSA. Okay, so now, what are the things I don't classify as that? So anything that says, hey, my parent doesn't want to fill out the FAFSA, that is not considered an unusual circumstance. Okay, it is not. So a student can't just say, go to a school and say, hey, my parent won't fill it out. It's like, well, we can't consider you, as an independent student because of that. The only option that the student does have, however, is that they are able to apply for unsubsidized loan support, direct unsubsidized loan support, but they won't be eligible for any of the other federal student aid programs. And that's not a change at all from previous years, but that is something that just we want to remind everyone about, that just because a parent is a dependent student who needs to have a parent, who's determined to be a dependent student, who is required to have a parent complete the FAFSA, just because that parent does not want to complete that FAFSA form does not mean that they would be eligible for all the full scope of federal student aid programs. Okay, so I see there's a couple questions here, and there's 2 more slides, so I want to jump right into those questions as well. 2 things that I want to point out here. One is that students now, one of the bigger changes is obviously you can always submit your colleges. Students can submit their colleges that they want to send the FAFSA to. Before, it was only 10 schools. Now it is 20. So the maximum is 20. So they can list up to 20 schools at a time into their FAFSA form. If they have more than 20 schools, after this first form has been submitted and processed, then they can go back and they can remove these institutions and add the other remaining institutions and resubmit. Okay. The second thing that is a major change is that there's no more SAR. There's no more student aid report. It is now called FAFSA summary. FAFSA submission summary. That is what it's called. So there's no more student aid report. So we got to take that language out too. It's hard to say FAFSA submission summary. On this, they'll be able to say their student aid index. So what we just covered, they'll be able to see that. They'll also be able to see their contributors, right? They'll also be able to see information about the colleges, all the colleges and the careers, schools that they've submitted. They'll also be able to see any next steps, checklists, things that they should be doing moving forward based on the application that they submitted. And also they'll have access to college scorecard as well, which is a new feature that we've implemented into the FAFSA form. So after they submitted to schools based on their student aid index, college scorecard will be able to tell them, based on the information you provide in the FAFSA, here's a predicted amount of aid that you'll receive from these institutions that you've selected. Okay, so that's a really nice feature that we're hoping that students and families appreciate. So here are the additional resources. And as we're going through these resources, I'm going to go back to the chat and see if there's questions earlier. But a couple of things that I want to point out here. The financial aid toolkit. This site is for you guys. It's all the college access professionals to use everything for better, faster, better future. So we highly recommend going here for all resources to help prepare you. PowerPoint presentations, all of that stuff is going to be there. Also, as you know, federal student aid estimator. So there's been a change from, I forgot what it used to be called before, but federal student aid estimator is where students can and student aid index be, right? What would that look like for them? Would they be Pell Grant eligible or not? All of that before the actual completing the FAFSA. And then if you're wanting to look to see what does the experience look like slide by slide, we do have a preview presentation of that, and it's linked right here. So this is a slide deck that literally shows you every single step as a dependent student, as an independent student, what the parent section will look like. It goes line by line, every single step. So if you're interested in doing that, you can. Also, we've had a number of webinars since May regarding the FAFSA. So if you missed any of them, no worries. We have put them on our new YouTube channel. Yes, we have a new YouTube channel called FSA Outreach. So you can go there to see all of the webinars that you may have missed, or even if you need a refresher on. Okay, so now I'm back here. We talked about the parent email address required. Yes, that parent email address is required in order for them to receive the invitation via email to be a contributor. So that is necessary and important. But a parent can log in to using their FSA ID and still see the form linked there. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have the email in order for it to work. No, they can sign in using their FSA ID and still see that you've been asked to complete or be a contributor for this 2024-25 form for each student. So, and I say each student if they have multiple students. Okay, to clarify, does not have, okay, so that's about deadlines for Alaska. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Also, let's see, another question. Okay, so this is all about communities and deadlines. Excellent. I heard that now the student only has to report 529 money that has them listed as a beneficiary. Is that true? No, only as owners. So if a student is listed as an owner or a what they call it, owner or a starts with a C, custodial. So if they're a custodial or owner, then they have to report it. If they're a beneficiary, they do not. However, if a student is using that money that year, so if they're using that money that year, then the following year, they do have to report any money that was used from any of these accounts as untaxed income. So that might change a little bit of their aid eligibility in the following year, but they don't have to report it if it's not if they're not the owners or the custodial of that account. Is homelessness or at risk of homelessness no longer a consideration for when must provide parental income? No, it still is. There's still the question there. They will automatically could be considered as an independent student. So if they're an independent student, they won't be required to invite a contributor to the form, and they won't need to have their parent information at all. So that is correct. They will be considered independent student. Nothing has changed about that. Are there any other questions? I think that was the last one that's on the chat. Yes, that is correct. They have to be unaccompanied as well. So that can't be, it can't just be, I was homeless in 2022, but now I live with my parent, right? So it's like you are unaccompanied. You don't have a parent and you're not with them. Okay, so it can't be, you can't just say, you know, I'm just homeless. It has to be unaccompanied homeless. That is correct. Any other questions? Are we clear here? As far as 529, I heard that a change is that parents do not have to report all plans for all of their children anymore, only the plan for a children they are contributing their info to on the FAFSA. Is that correct? Again, if a parent is the owner of that, so the FAFSA only asks for student and parent assets. So if this 529 plan is owned by grandparents or anyone else outside of the student or the parent, they are not asked to report that on the FAFSA, okay? But if a student or the parent is the owner, then they must report it on the FAFSA. It is considered an asset. Okay. Is there any other questions? Yes, so all so on the form, so just to make sure I'm being clear here. The FAFSA is going to ask the student and the parents how many children are in their household and how many of them are going into school, okay? It just won't be considered for the need analysis. So with that, they will still need to say, okay, I have this many children in college and I have this many plans, right? They will still have to offer that same amount for all of the plans of all of their children, okay? So if they're the owners, they have to report all of the different accounts for each child. It does not come into the need analysis about the financial need of the overall student just because they have other siblings who are also in college. Okay, excellent, great question, and it's good, a clarifying question. Okay, 5 minutes to spare. Any other burning questions? Is a transfer of guardianship form considered the same as official adoption? Great question. So it has to be legal guardianship. So if it's a legal guardianship, not just a transfer of guardianship, but it's actually legally recognized by the courts, then yes, that would be considered official adoption and be considered as accurate documentation. Correct. Great question. Any other questions? Well, in the meantime, as you're thinking, I want to share with you some other additional resources that are coming. So one is the prototype. Now, what is a prototype? The prototype is, if you remember, before, you used to be able to have a code and log in and go through the FAFSA form yourself as like a test account, just to get used to the experience before you start advising students and families. That still could be the case, but it's called prototype, okay? So the FAFSA prototype is coming out in the next couple of weeks. So you will be able to have access and prepare for that. So this is the time to really just go in, make sure you're practicing the different lingo now, contributors, and as the submission summary, getting all of that language changed over you, taking out EFC, replacing it with FSA, and then you'll be able to go in and literally see the experience yourself. So if you have students in mind, it's like, okay, I have this student in mind. I wonder what that experience is going to be like for them to fill it out. You'll be able to test all of that in the next coming weeks. So we're really excited about that. So you want to stay tuned for all of those things. You also want to make sure that you are signed up for partner email if you're not. I encourage you again to get connected to the YouTube channel, our FSA Outreach YouTube channel, because all webinars that we'll be having moving forward are going to be about this. So you want to make sure. Also, I want to share with you that we are having a boot camp coming up for students and families. So that's October 25th and 26th. So I'm putting that in the chat here. And this is going to be for parents, students, and college expert professionals to be able to understand the FAFSA. So we're going to have a webinar about the FAFSA. We're going to have a webinar on the prototype itself. We'll have a webinar on return to repayment and save plan and all of that stuff too. So everything will be October 25th and 26th. Sorry, and I'm putting in the link here. So we encourage you to share with your students and families and also to yourself so you can go ahead and register for that. Okay, so that's coming up. Again, that's the prototype's couple of weeks. The boot camp is October 25th and 26th. And we'll be also announcing the actual date that the FAFSA will launch in December. Right now, we're just making sure everybody knows it's December. And then we're also doing all the new material. So that includes PDF forms, walkthroughs, PowerPoints, every research you can imagine is being developed right now and will be available in the end of October and early November. So please be on the lookout. We're working really hard to equip you to make sure that all your students and families are best prepared as possible for December. We also will be planning a December-January boot camp as well. So if they happen to miss October and they say, well, December is probably better or January is probably better, please look out for that. We'll be doing another boot camp just to help those who may have missed a lot of the information in October. I really thank you for joining today. I hope this was very helpful for you, that you got your questions answered. And I'll be able to share this over with, I'll be over to share this PowerPoint. I'm like, if I haven't already, I'll make sure that I'll share this PowerPoint so that you all will have access to this so you can play around the slides and all of the links. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Tanika, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for sharing our expertise with us. And we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Here we go.